We're going live. Hiya, John Wedger here. I'm an ex-Scotland Yard detective, and now I dedicate my time really sort of exposing organised child abuse cover-ups and giving people the platform to speak out about their abuse. And as we're seeing at the moment with the government inquiry, that the institutions, i.e. the police, the church and the government, have known full well what's been going on and have deliberately covered it up. So I believe it's my job really to go out there and get the truth out there. And unfortunately, when you speak the truth, you get a lot of opposition, and that's going to be part of the topic today. Now, we're in a lovely location. We're in a churchyard, which is apt in North London, and we've had quite a bit of disruption already, which again is going to be quite apparent when we talk about the subject. I'm with a guy that I've known for a while, and someone who's been highly recommended, even before I knew him, for me to speak to, and this is Mr. Wilfred Wong.
Hello.
And I'll give Wilfred a brief introduction, but the rest of it will be down to himself. And Wilfred is an ex-military guy. He's from the Far East, and he's dedicated decades now to investigating and exposing something which is termed SRA, which is Satanic Ritual Abuse. And as we can see, that child abuse is the elephant in the room with a lot of what's going on in society, and it's something that no one wants to talk about, and those that do speak out are deliberately hammered into silence. And there's an almost elite core to child abuse, and that is something, if they don't want to talk about child abuse, they definitely don't want to talk about this is SRA, Satanic Ritual Abuse. And I was even warned, speak about anything, but you talk about SRA, you're in a world of trouble. And I did speak about Satanic Ritual Abuse because in what I'm doing and in my previous work, it would crop up more so now. And I'm hearing testimonies of people that have endured this vile practice that's gone on, and the attack that not just myself but also the members of the group, and it has extended to my family, have come under for speaking out is absolutely appalling. And these people that are involved in its cover-up and the attack, I think are equally as appalling. So I'll pass over to Wilfred. A little brief sort of resume of yourself, Wilfred, and and how you come into this sort of line of work.
Thank you. I've been covering the issue of Satanist ritual abuse for 26 years now. In 1993, I was approached by a member of parliament about issue of SRA that he was approached about by someone who was helping SRA survivors. So I helped this MP to deal with these issues and have been involved since then. And I organized at least 4 meetings so far on SRA at the House of Commons, starting with one in 1994. And one of the people who spoke at that meeting was in fact Geoffrey Dickens MP, the late MP, who spoke out very openly about SRA at the House of Commons, made a lot of enemies because of that. But SRA is a subject that we need to keep on speaking out about, and we ought to not just speak about SRA, we ought to be shouting it out from the rooftops, because I have seen over the last 26 years way too much silence on this very important subject, and way too many cover-ups on SRA in this society, which just enables this evil to keep growing from strength to strength. I also have a legal background as a barrister. I'm a former practicing barrister, and I have seen up front from my past experiences the workings or the lack of working sometimes in the criminal justice system in this country. And I'm aware that it is one of the hardest justice systems to actually get convictions, successful convictions of defendants, which is why I'm later going to explain it's so important to take note of the fact that there are successfully prosecuted SRA cases in this country, and that they have been able to leap over those barriers which make it so difficult to get successful convictions, such as the very high standard of proof that's required of beyond reasonable doubt. And so these successfully prosecuted SRA cases should be taken very seriously. So all I have seen over the last 26 years, I have to say, have only increased my belief and my knowledge that SRA exists, because I've only seen the evidence increase, not decrease, on this subject.
Yeah. Well, I'll keep the mic here and pass that, because there will be interaction. Now, going back to that, having been for a long time, a Scotland Yard detective and investigating child abuse, we have to be trained, and it's a specialist unit, so there has to be specialist training, and the topics in which you'll be dealing with are very emotive and quite harrowing. And so you have to be psychometrically tested. And one of the things when I went on my initial child abuse investigation course was that they brought out the investigator's manual, and it actually did cite satanic ritual abuse, and it went on about a case in the Orkney Islands. Are you aware of what went on in the Orkneys?
Yes, I'm aware of that. I'm also aware that many of the survivors of the SRA there sadly harmed themselves or took their lives eventually, which is part of the phenomenon of SRA, that some of the victims eventually end up committing suicide. We don't help them when we deny the existence of SRA. It's part of their healing process, I believe, when we listen to the victims, 100%. Take them seriously, and bring them justice. The trouble is that the usual crowd of suspects, the chronic deniers of SRA, come out of the woodwork whenever anyone tries to expose it, and they just make life for the SRA survivors that much more difficult.
I mean, the thing is, it says in the Bible, by their deeds shall you know them, and what they're doing in attacking, because I'm under an attack, and this isn't about me and the attack I'm under, far from it, but it puts people off, and they just can't take the attack, and they dedicate their time into scrutinise everything you do. They cause disruption, they cause chaos, they cause you to waste your time in answering to spurious allegations that they're making, and they are a wretched bunch. Now, if we can actually go back, let's take this right the way back, and for the uninitiated, what actually is SRA and what is Satanism?
SRA is Satanist Ritual Abuse, and it is a brutal form of abuse targeted at children, youth, vulnerable adults, that involves both physical and psychological and also sexual abuse. And it is done involving Satanist rituals. So hence the name Satanist Ritual Abuse.
Can you go into a bit more detail?
Yes. It is usually done not as a one-off, but as part of an ongoing process, repeatedly, of abuse aimed at a victim, lasting for years. And this is part of the Satanist rituals, as I earlier pointed out. So it is part of the beliefs of the Satanists who are doing these rituals, that they should be inflicting this abuse and torture on their victims. They believe that they are pleasing the devil by torturing their victims. They believe that they will get more power, because at the core of Satanism is the ruthless pursuit of power, by torturing these victims and by abusing them. So there is a belief system behind this that supports the use of this brutal form of abuse and this brutal form of torture. We need to take note of that, because this is not the same as, for example, when you have reports of abuse in the church, where, for example, some Catholic priests have been found to be abusing children. In those cases, what they are doing is violating the teachings of their church, whereas in the case of Satanist ritual abuse, these are people who are believers in an ideology which they believe encourages them to actually inflict this abuse and torture on the children. And it is a core part of their belief system to inflict such abuse and torture repeatedly on their victims.
And we're getting technical. We've suffered nothing but technical difficulties, and that is just part of the course. But why children?
They especially like to target children because they believe that this is something that the devil wants them to do. They also take special satisfaction in corrupting innocence. The more innocent the victim, the more they want to corrupt and destroy their innocence. So, for example, part of SRA is to force children to sexually abuse each other.
Yeah.
And part of SRA is to force children to do things that corrupt them, for example, forcing them to watch pornography or using them to make pornography, or both. And it is very, very different from, say, pedophilia, where the pedophile may not normally be interested, usually isn't interested in getting the child, for example, to abuse other children, but obviously wants to abuse the child himself.
I've got a question for you, because I think the police, inadvertently, when they are dealing with allegations of child abuse, may actually be dealing with SRA. And the reason I say that is because the kids that I dealt with, some of them said that they would be taken to parties where they would be sexually abused. There was a book that was written by Audrey Harper called Dancing with the Devil, and she is an ex-Satanist and was heavily involved in Satanism and very candid in what she says. She goes on about that she was made to drink blood of a baby, and then they would eat things like the holy bread would be made out of feces and semen and stuff like that. And she said part of her job in the coven would be to recruit children into Satanism, but also to take children to parties where they will be anally raped and raped, basic girls and boys. So my point here is, Wilfred, that child abuse investigators may well be dealing with allegations of abuse, but they might have a deeper rooted element to them, like a satanic element to them.
Yes, you're right. In fact, a lot of these so-called parties are actually Satanist orgies. And in the Satanist calendar, there are specific dates that are set aside for Satanist orgies. And sometimes the police miss these signs. In fact, probably often they miss these signs because of the general denial of SRA's existence, because of the general inclination to not do anything meaningful about the existence of SRA. So, for example, the Metropolitan Police website actually acknowledges publicly the existence of satanic abuse. It's on their website, which is great. Unfortunately, in practice, the Metropolitan Police has not got a very good track record in investigating SRA cases, although there was one Met police officer who, to his credit, had a training course done for some of the detectives on SRA. The police officer in question was Pete Spindler.
Yeah, I know. He was my old boss.
Great. We need more police officers like that, because he encountered a lot of opposition for simply doing his job and getting detectives trained in this subject. The Met Police website acknowledges existence of SRA, so why not, as a matter of logic, train them to deal with SRA?
Yeah, I know that even Special Branch monitor cult groups, and I was told that by an investigator, and that was her job, was to monitor cult, and part of them are like satanic groups, so they are fully aware of it. What we're seeing now is revelations that are coming out about people that are high up that have been involved in satanic rituals, and one of them, the allegations, I've spoken to two people that have claimed to have been sexually abused by former Prime Minister Ted Heath. I've seen a document that was produced where it lists people that are involved in satanic abuse, and that's what's termed the Raines lists. I'd like to talk about that and the credibility of this, because it has been attacked, but the source of it, the woman who was the author of it, is quite a credible person. And also there were revelations with Operation Conifer, which was set up by Wiltshire Police to look at the allegation against Ted Heath that he did have an involvement with Satanism. And the other thing I like to say is that, the debunkers, and there are a lot of them, and these are top journalists. I've been the target of one of them, who has done a lot of work with one of the biggest newspapers and a magazine as well, periodical magazine. That's sort of, again, we've got to be very careful, because I haven't got the money to fight these liably, but these are people that are held in high esteem in society, which are going out their way to debunk these allegations. Now, there is also a list of successful prosecutions that have been cited in the British courts within recent history, where there has been a recognised satanic element to them. You talk about that, Wilfred?
Yes, there is a lot of mounting evidence, hard evidence, of the existence of SRA in the UK. It's not getting any less, it's getting increasingly stronger and bigger. So the so-called debunkers are actually just spinning myths. They are there to try and sweep everything under the carpet. They don't let facts get in the way of their conclusions. They never let truth or hard evidence get in the way of their conclusions, for the simple reason that they have a hidden agenda to sweep SRA under the carpet, mainly because they themselves are involved in SRA. And we know this from some of the SRA survivors who've been naming names about people involved in SRA. We know that the Raines list, which is a credible list, has named certain journalists involved also in SRA.
High-ranked police officers as well.
Yep. Some of whom have been well known for denying the existence of SRA.
And also attacked whistleblowers.
Yes, and also attacked whistleblowers. So these so-called debunkers need to be aware that we know a lot more about them than they realize, and that one of these days they're going to get very publicly exposed.
Can you talk about the Raines list, explain what it is, and the names on it, how they got on there?
Okay, first let me just touch quickly on the list of successfully prosecuted SRA cases in this country, especially in light of how difficult it is to get a successful criminal prosecution in this country. This is very strong evidence of the existence of SRA. This list was put together in the early 90s by two British journalists who put together two separate lists on successfully prosecuted SRA cases. One was put together by Tim Tate, and the other was put together by Andrew Boyd. Both of them are professional British journalists who have both written two separate books on SRA in the UK. Now, this list has been combined together because both of them would complement each other in their lists, and so combining them made good sense, but also updating them with some more recent cases since the early 90s of SRA cases that have been successfully prosecuted in the courts. For example, the Kidwelly case in Wales. And so there are 10 cases altogether on this list, which is available on the internet. And this list shows that the Crown Courts themselves have found to be credible evidence of SRA that was openly shared in the courts, where the SRA was not covered up or misrepresented as just child sex abuse, but as Satanist ritual abuse openly, and the defendants were successfully prosecuted. So the witnesses were believed, and the standard of beyond reasonable doubt of the evidence was reached. Now, this is very strong evidence, which of course the Satanists fear, and therefore they try very hard to ignore it and act as if it doesn't exist. And I'll just give you one or two of these cases as an example. On 9th November 1982, Malcolm and Susan Smith and Albert and Carol Hickman were convicted in Telford, Shropshire, for a series of sexual and physical assaults against children during the course of satanic rituals. Malcolm Smith carved an inverted cross on one child's abdomen and branded her genitals with a red-hot altar knife. So the inverted cross on the child's abdomen, that is quite a commonly used satanic symbol. A more recent case, which was the Kidwelly case, on March 11, 2011, Colin Batley, the leader of a Satanist coven, was convicted at Swansea Crown Court of more than 20 sexual offences against children, including 11 rapes. He and other Satanists had ritually abused children in Kidwelly, Wales, where their coven was based. The children, some as young as 11, were subjected to organised and systematic abuse by Batley, his wife, and 2 women coven members. Jacqueline Marling, 42, was jailed for 12 years for aiding and abetting rape, causing prostitution, indecency with a child, and inciting a child to engage in sexual activity. Badley's wife, Elaine, 47, was jailed for 8 years on 3 charges of indecency with a child and sexual activity with a child. Shelley Miller, 35, was jailed for 5 years for indecency with a child and inciting a child to engage in sex. A 5th defendant, Vincent Barden, 70, admitted assaulting an underage girl. This case was widely reported in the UK media as a Satanist ritual abuse case, and I even attended a briefing by a police detective who spoke about how they managed to successfully crack this SRA case. So it is no secret that there are several successfully prosecuted SRA cases in this country, and that is the UK Crown Courts, the official justice system, showing us that SRA exists. And now we've also got the Metropolitan Police Service officially acknowledging SRA's existence on their website. So one has to actually be willfully blind to deny that SRA exists in this country, or incredibly stupid.
Yeah, like I said, I'm being inundated with people coming to me wanting their testimony to get out, and there is a strong percentage that are victims of SRA. And one woman was saying that she was actually sold into SRA. She was used as a child prostitute. She was pimped out, for a better term of a word, by a pastor who was sent to the school to give religious education, and was actually them pimping her out. And then she was then sold on to a group that were taking her to satanic rituals. And the memories are coming back because they were very horrific, what she went through. But one of the things she was saying was that when she was used for child pornography and for magazines, she was sedated and usually unconscious. She later saw evidence of this in magazines where she recognised herself in there, and she was actually unconscious and men having sex with her. But she said that the thing with the satanic rituals, they wanted her lucid, and she would be given psychotropic drugs, so she would actually be given hallucinogenics. So when her memory recall was coming back, it was marred by images. She remembers butterflies and rabbits everywhere, but that was the hallucinogenic effect. So at some point, these people must have known that she will start probably be in a position to give evidence against them. So this is what they did. They actually screwed her mind up with hallucinogenics.
Yes, it's common characteristic of SRA for children to be drugged, and the drugging will affect to some extent their recollections. But one of the signs that SRA is being inflicted on a child is the regular use of drugs. And these Satanist orgies that we mentioned earlier is also common for drugs to be taken at such orgies. Satanists are very quick to use drugs in their practices, and it's not surprising that sometimes Satanist covens engage in drug trafficking. Audrey Harper herself, who was a former drug addict, mentioned how her Satanist coven used to feed her habit and help to keep her in the coven by supplying her with heroin.
Can you just give a bit of a shout out about our book? It's
Yes.
Dancing with the Devil. It's available on Amazon, isn't it?
Dance with the Devil is available on Amazon UK. It's by Audrey Harper, a former Satanist, and she wrote about the Satanist activities that she witnessed firsthand, including the ritual sacrifice of a baby at the Satanist coven meeting, the first one that she attended in 1961. Now, it's important, I think, to take note of that date. Halloween 1961, she was initiated into Satanism, and she witnessed the ritual sacrifice of a baby at that coven meeting. We know that the first big publicity about SRA in the UK, in modern times at least, occurred in the 1980s. But according to Audrey Harper's own experience, Satanist covens which committed human sacrifice were in existence in England as far back as 1961. So it is a myth to think that SRA is only a very recent phenomenon in the UK. It actually goes back further than we realize. And the fact that it's been going on undetected or unacknowledged largely for decades has allowed it to spread across the country and to grow exponentially, so that the existence and the extent of SRA that exists today is much bigger than when Audrey joined the coven back in 1961. And what they were doing is very similar to what the covens do today: human sacrifice, sexual abuse of children, killing people who they believe were enemies of the coven, the use of intimidation, of force, engaging in illegal activity like drug trafficking, all very common characteristics of SRA today. So not a lot has changed apart from the exponential growth of Satanist ritual abuse in the UK since 1961.
Yeah, I've had a couple of people that come to me that have been ex-Satanists, and I've discussed at length the rituals and what goes on in the rituals, and they're truly abhorrent. And I said, is there any way that these groups could be infiltrated and that someone could claim to be a Satanist and then sort of monitor the groups without taking part in the rituals? And he said, no, that's impossible. Once you're there are no spectators, everyone takes part.
Yes, that is true. The testimonies I've had from SRA survivors include being forced to take part in ritual sacrifices. You get reports of even children being forced to help kill the ritually sacrificed victim. So they have no qualms about forcing children, young children even, to participate in ritual murder, because it's all about corrupting them as young as possible and as much as possible, and also about implicating everybody in the crimes to make it harder for them to report the crimes to the police. That is the nature of SRA. But it's important to also realize that the law in the UK has become more open towards whistleblowers and protecting whistleblowers who have been forced to participate in crimes, especially those whistleblowers on organized crime. The law is still behind, for example, the United States in protecting such whistleblowers, but it's becoming much more open to protecting them when they whistleblow on organized criminal activity. So it is possible for SRA whistleblowers to come forward and to report crimes, even though they themselves may have been forced or pressured to take part in such crimes at one point.
Yeah, I mean, the other thing is really getting the establishment to acknowledge it, and also the chain of people that will be involved in a victim of SRA, such as GPs, such as social workers, and one of the groups I'm calling out to are the religious institutions. You know, this is an attack on the spirituality of a child. What are you doing to protect them? And they seem at times to be pretty silent. However, I had a meeting with a Catholic priest who's been very supportive, and I know the Catholic Church has come under huge criticism, and I've spoken to a lot of victims of the Catholic institution. However, I will say that from the people I spoke to, it is all religions in which this goes on. It's not just confined to the Catholics. And this priest turned around to me and he said he's an ex-military guy. He's from South Africa, and he said that in Africa that the people accept that there is a darker element to spirituality, that there is this satanic side of it. He said in the UK, people are just totally and utterly oblivious to the fact that there is Satanism, there is devil worship, and a total reluctance to speak about it. And I know that from a fact, when I have mentioned it, people they don't want to hear it. Can we not talk about it, please? And they just want to move away from the subject, and it's quite worrying, Wilfred, Just your views on that.
Yes, I think it's important to distinguish between religions where child sex abuse occur, where the leaders of the religion may commit child sex abuse, but the religious systems that they claim to follow do not themselves encourage child sex abuse. Yeah. That's important to note.
Of course, yeah.
Whereas in Satanism, it's very different. Satanism actually encourages child sex abuse. For example, one of the leading international thinkers on Satanism, modern Satanism, is British, Aleister Crowley. And he openly advocated that a child sacrifice would be very helpful in obtaining spiritual power.
Yeah.
It's actually in his book entitled Magic, which you can get from some of the major bookstores.
Spelled with a K at the end.
Yes, spelled with a K at the end. And I wanted to see it for myself, so I had a look at the book and saw that he was advocating the child sacrifice of a boy. Very openly, no apologies, he was doing that. And bear in mind that he is not just some fringe follower of Satanism. He is still one of the leading thinkers on SRA, on Satanism. And in the Kidwelly case, which I mentioned earlier, when I attended the briefing by the detective on how they cracked this case, they went into the beliefs of this particular Satanist coven. And they mentioned that Aleister Crowley was one of the leading figures that this coven followed. And Crowley not only openly and publicly advocated the sacrifice of children, but he was also implicated in the disappearance of a baby. He was never convicted of that accusation because there was apparently a lack of evidence, but he was investigated.
I mean, that's interesting you're saying that, because if we look at Crowley and we look at his followers, he's on the Beatles album cover. He had association with Jimmy Savile. Was it Jimmy Page? I think from Led Zeppelin bought his house. He had a place in Scotland. And so the people who followed him were very, very high up in the music industry. There was rumours of Peaches Geldof was involved in his group, the OTO. And I was actually approached in the street about a month ago by a fella who recognised me in central London, came up to me, and he produced a medallion, and it had OTO on it, and it had various symbols on it, and he said, look, this is the one of the gifts you get when you join it. And he was a member of it. He was heavily involved with the music industry. He's now claims to be a friend of Jesus, and he was openly discussing what was going on. And you look at the pedestal that Crowley got was monumental, and what the press gave him as well. And this comes back to the Reigns list, when I've seen names on there that I've recognised, names that I've indirectly worked with in the police that have, there was one of them, I'm not going to name names, but one guy, he's on this list, and he was involved in the unit I was working on. And you can see now with the ICSA, the Independent Investigation of Child Sexual Abuse, how that unit had deliberately at senior level covered up the prostitution of children. I myself was threatened and silenced for exposing similar crimes against children, and we've just seen in the convictions you've alluded to that these children were forced into child prostitution. So we can't dismiss the fact that the prevalence of this crime, the fact that there is a deliberate attempt by the British police, or has been, not to investigate these crimes. We've seen allegations of people very high up in British government, including former Prime Minister, involved in sex with children and their links to Satanism. it wouldn't be wrong in drawing an inference that Satanism could be at the core of a lot of this abuse and its cover-ups. What are your views on that?
Yes, I think you're onto something there. Let me just conclude about Crowley, and then I'll comment on the Rains list, which you asked me to comment on earlier. Crowley also advocated, and it's no big secret that he did this, it's in his writings, that the summary of the whole law of Satanism is do what thou wilt.
Yeah.
Do whatever you want. That is all that Satanism is about. The problem with that is that when you say do whatever you want, regardless of how it affects others, that is a kind of a license given to people to do things like sexual abuse of children, ritual sacrifice, murder, harming children in whatever way they choose to, because according to Aleister Crowley, and not only Aleister Crowley, also according to other modern Satanist thinkers such as Anton LaVey of the Church of Satan in the United States, do whatever you want sums up Satanism. So you can do whatever you want. If you want to harm a child, if you want to abuse a child, then that's okay. So SRA goes to the core teachings of Satanism.
Well, can I just interject with that? Just 1 second, Wilfred, because it's something that was mentioned to me by this great woman who's a criminal profiler on child murders, and she was saying that sometimes those that have sex with children do it for one reason: they enjoy it. But some of them hide behind the fact that they've done it under duress because of the coven they're in. What are your views on that?
They may use that as an excuse, but the fact that they are in the coven in the first place and haven't tried to leave it needs to be examined. The fact is that there are many SRA survivors who have, difficult as it is, have managed to get out of the covens that they were in, and so they have a responsibility to follow their conscience and not simply just follow the coven in whatever they do. They also need to examine the fact that they themselves, once having been victims, ought not to be victimizing other children. And they need to understand what the victim's point of view is when they are harming other children. So there is a responsibility there. I think it's important to also recognize that, at least in the experience of many people dealing with such cover-ups, that more than half of the cover-ups tend to be SRA cases in this country. So in the UK, if SRA is acknowledged and dealt with in a more meaningful and effective way, then one would be dealing with more than half of the cover-ups of child abuse in this country. That would be a huge support for victims of child abuse across the country. That's another reason why SRA needs to be dealt with, and needs to be dealt with effectively instead of swept under the carpet, because that will go a long way towards helping so many child abuse victims across this country. And we're talking about a lot of SRA victims. I'll give you an example. In 1992, the Dispatches program featured a documentary on SRA. Very rare documentary on SRA shown in this country, perhaps the last one shown in this country in 1992 in February. They set up 15 helplines for SRA victims and survivors to call in at the end of the program. They underestimated the extent of the problem because 15 helplines was far from enough. When they featured the phone number of the helpline on the TV documentary, within 5 minutes, according to British Telecoms, they had 595 attempted phone calls trying to get in to the helplines but couldn't. Within the first hour of that helpline number being broadcasted on Channel 4, they had 4,500 people trying to get through to the helpline numbers. 4,500, just the first hour.
This really is the elephant in the room, isn't it?
Yes, because it is a huge number of victims across the country who have suffered SRA and are waiting for their story to be told, waiting for their suffering to be publicly acknowledged, waiting for the authorities to do something about it.
I like to say that people have pleaded with me, please talk about SRA. And there is this divide within the survivor community, if we can term it that those that are victims of abuse, and there's those that are victims of SRA. And the SRA ones have approached me and said, please, no one is talking about this. Unfortunately, when you do talk about this, you get these groups that absolutely hammer you. Now, we had recently these two children that came forward and mentioned about a abuse that was going on in the Hampstead area, and anyone who seems to be on the path to support these children has found themselves before a court. And they've also found themselves victim of this absolutely abhorrent group who goes under the title of Hoaxed, who are going out their way to just absolutely demonise anyone who tries to speak about SRA. And I've had it on so many sources are getting back to me and saying that these groups have links with Satanism.
I have no doubt that these groups are controlled and dominated by Satanists. I think there is a long track record in my experience, of people who keep on going on about so-called debunking SRA's existence, that they themselves have a personal vested interest in covering it up because they're involved. I think we need to realize that these disagreements by so-called skeptics are people who go way over the top than any ordinary skeptic who has an honest difference of opinion would do. I think it's important to also realize that if these groups are attacking you a lot, it's because you're getting the job done. You're talking about SRA, which is great. We need to keep talking about SRA for the sake of the victims, for the sake of the past victims, the present victims, and the future victims if we don't speak out. We need to keep on talking about SRA, and we need to shout it from the rooftops and keep on shouting it from the rooftops.
And one of the things that has been mentioned to me, and quite a few people have said that the victims of this and people that have got testimony, not just of being victim of SRA, but also cover-ups, they've said, give me a polygraph test. I will take a polygraph test. And they've got a version of polygraph which is something like 99.9 reoccurring, accurate now. And so many victims have said, put me before a polygraph test. Now, the Canadians use it, the Australians use it, the Americans use it. You know, there's an inference drawn if you don't take it, so it's not deemed it's a not done thing. There's one state in America that anyone who's arrested for a child murder has to take a polygraph test, and if they don't, there is a huge inference. Now, if you're innocent of a crime, you'll willingly take this, and if you're a victim and you want your voice heard, a lot of them are just saying, give me a polygraph test, I will happily take one. And I've actually had one guy, and he said that he will get the funding for anyone that wants to come forward on quite a high-profile case and pay for the victims to have it. You know, so it's really called for.
Yes, I think this is because this is a sign that the victims are absolutely telling the truth, and so they're confident that they will pass a polygraph test. And I know of at least one SRA survivor who successfully took a polygraph test. I would also like to extend the polygraph test to some of the people you mentioned earlier, like Hoaxed. I'd like them to take a polygraph test, and I'd like to draw a long list of questions for them, starting with, are you a Satanist abuser? Because there are a lot of questions that need to be asked about these groups, why they spend so much time trying to bury the subject of SRA, which has been acknowledged in the Crown Courts and by the Metropolitan Police.
Well, Wilfred, to keep hold of the mic a minute, I'd like to know that anyone that's going out their way to attack a victim, given a testimony of any form of child abuse, why are they doing it? Yet, you know, we have come under monumental attack just for exposing the truth. Why? Why are they doing it?
I would encourage investigation. Close investigation of some of the characters involved with these groups, and exposure of them. But I would also counsel not taking what they say seriously at all. It's a bit like a mosquito. You know, the mosquito may land on your skin and you clear it off and you don't pay too much attention to it because there's no point. Because what they talk about, I call them manufacturers of bullshit. And so all that comes out of their mouths, all that they claim, is just bullshit. Why take so much attention to bullshit?
Yeah, well, Audrey Harper says that in her book. And bear in mind, she was an active Satanist, and she said that they would deliberately infiltrate certain groups that were doing good in the community and totally destroy them. They would make allegations about them, they would disrupt them, they would cause financial issues, which is exactly what happens when people like myself do some, what we deem as good work.
Yes, because for them, telling lies is the truth. So they will tell lies because that's their language. And they will lie as much as they feel they need to try and discredit whoever exposes SRA. But the good news is that you are exposing SRA. That's why they try to attack you. Because the more they attack you, the more it shows that they're afraid of you. You are hitting them where it hurts. And so my advice is keep on hitting them where it hurts. Ramp it up, ratchet it up. Because at the end of the day, they can't hurt you unless you let them.
Can you give some advice to survivors of SRA that are looking for a way out or for help? What do they do?
Well, it depends on the stage of their case. If they're trying to get justice, for example, in their case, there's a big difference between an SRA survivor who's got the police at least investigating their case as compared to a police force that just tries to blow them off. And it also depends on which part of the country they're in. Some police forces are better at investigating SRA than others. Some police forces are notorious for ignoring this issue. So one thing I would counsel is that they try, even though it may be difficult, but perhaps through forums like this, through contacts like yourself, to get in touch with people who know about the reality of SRA and are willing to give genuine support to SRA survivors. And the same goes for therapists and counselors who know about SRA, have dealt with it. Try and get into contact with such people to provide them the help they need. Obviously, the last thing they need is to hear from a skeptical person or an ignorant person on SRA. And that to try and encourage them with the fact that there is a growing number, I believe, of therapists and counselors and activists who know that SRA is real, who want to do something about it, who do sincerely want to help. Yes, there will always be some false ones out there, but if you look hard enough, you will find the right ones, I believe.
Well, we're doing a live stream, and there may well be questions coming up. If there's anything that comes up that people want to ask, shout it out, Trace, and we'll address it. What can just put this, keep hold of it a minute. But what about locations? And the dynamics of how these groups sort of worship.
Yes, unfortunately, as one SRA survivor pointed out at a meeting I organized in 2001, she said that in her view, every town and village and city in the UK has a Satanist coven. And unfortunately, she's probably right, because in my experience, I'm getting reports of SRA occurring all across the country. And it is not getting any smaller, it's getting bigger, it's growing, it's being helped to grow by the general environment of denial of SRA. And that gives a fertile environment for SRA to spread and to grow, for Satanism to also grow, and it's growing rapidly. I know that some years ago, for example, the Royal Navy officially acknowledged the Satanist rituals to be conducted on Royal Navy ships, for example. So there is this problem spreading across the country. There is this problem of SRA locations across the country. Some of the open SRA locations, the open air SRA locations, are in parts of the country which are regarded as being very beautiful. scenic. But as they often do, the Satanist abusers take what is beautiful and scenic and they try and turn it to something dark and ugly and evil. And we're going to see more of this unless we do something about SRA, but some of our most scenic parts of our country are being destroyed by these people going out there at night to do their rituals. And of course that creates also a very dark spiritual environment in those parts of the country. The fact is that SRA is also spreading to many different levels of society, including, as you rightly said earlier, the politicians. The Reigns list, I believe, is a very accurate list. I know the woman who put that list together, a very articulate spokesperson on SRA, a very courageous woman. She was a psychiatrist who treated SRA survivors for about 30 years and had a wealth of knowledge and experience on dealing with this subject. She was one of the few therapists who actually took practical action to collect the information and put some order into it. All the information that was being shared with her for so many years by SRA survivors.
The name goes on there was a qualifying factor.
Yes, she had a system. Her system, the woman her name was Dr. Joan Coleman, and she died not too long ago in her 80s. And she told me her system was that at least 2 SRA survivors who were independent of each other had to identify the same name for the name to go on the list. And just to show you how accurate her list is, her list includes the name Edward Heath and acknowledges the fact that there were 5 SRA survivors who identified him, who were independent of each other. And her list, of course, is about people involved in SRA. So it clearly said Edward Heath engaged in SRA, and there were 5 witnesses, independent witnesses, who said this. Now, the Operation Conifer report, which came years later, acknowledged that 6 witnesses, independent of each other, identify Edward Heath as being involved in satanic abuse.
And Mike Veal himself even alluded to that in an address to Sky News.
Yes. So this shows you how accurate the Reigns list is, that years before Operation Conifer and the investigation that took place, it was already pointing out almost the same number of corroborative witnesses saying that Ted Heath did satanic abuse. And there are other names on the list, on the Reigns list, many names of people including parliamentarians, journalists, police officers on that list, which is an indication of something that I have already long known, that the Satanist abusers have infiltrated many different levels of society because they want to influence, dominate, and ultimately control our society. Because Satanist abusers are not just in it for the abuse, they are in it for the power. Right. They want our society to become a reflection of their values. Right. And their values are very dark, very evil, very harmful. What they do in secret to children now, they want ultimately to be mainstreamed throughout our society. And for them to do this, they need to access social services, government, police, judiciary, and they are in the process of doing this.
If I may sort of bring this onto another level, the people that I've been speaking to have been saying when they've been in these big institutions, children's homes institutions, they were saying that there were social workers who told them to shut up or ignored them. There was medical staff that treated their injuries, which were usually to the sexual organs or the anus, and that they again shut it up. So what you're saying on a satanic level, that there are members of these groups that cover these disciplines, and these victims are saying exactly the same thing. However, they've not mentioned about a satanic connection because they wouldn't know that. But there is this deliberate conspiracy of silence that is going on with them. And you mentioned about power. Again, this thing called the Reigns list. It's on the internet. We're not saying anything liable. It's there. It's been there a while. I think those that have tried to expose it found themselves in a world of trouble as well. You know, so it shows that this document is a problem to them, you know. But no, you're right. You're very right.
Yes, I think it's important to note that in 1991, a book was published called Chasing Satan by Diane Corr, who was one of the first activists speaking out about SRA publicly. And she got the usual hatchet job done on her, the usual attacks by the usual suspects trying to deny SRA.
I'm going to get after doing this. They'll provide a video.
Sure, it
exposed and
comes with the territory.
It's quite amusing, to be honest, you know.
But the rule of thumb is always don't take these clowns seriously because they're just a bunch of liars. And as I call them, bullshit manufacturers. Why bother with them? The thing to note is that in Chasing Satan, Diane Corr warned very specifically that Satanist abusers are not the same as pedophiles. That unlike pedophiles who are not trying to transform society to their specific agenda, Satanist abusers are. Their role is not just about abuse, it's about transforming society. They want to do that, but they're not going to do it by democratic means. They're not going to do it by setting up a political party. They do it by infiltration. They do it secretly. And they are too cowardly to come out openly and try and push their agenda openly as Satanists. They do it by under the table means, by secretive ways. And her warning back in 91 has come to pass. We've seen increasing infiltration of the police and of the social services and of other levels of society by the Satanist abusers, which makes it more difficult sometimes to get justice in some of the SRA cases. But it's not impossible. There are still good people doing their jobs properly in law enforcement. It's not all Satanist dominated. There are still good people in social services. We still have good people at these different levels of society, but unless we expose SRA and get the Satanist abusers put behind bars as they so richly deserve, until that happens, the danger exists that one day we will reach a level of infiltration where there are no good people left in these crucial levels of society. So exposing SRA is not only about protecting children from SRA, as important as that is, it's also about protecting our freedoms, protecting our society, preventing our society from going down to a very dark and evil place. And the sooner we can do it, the better. And now is the time to do it. I have noticed a change in people's attitudes since the revelations about Jimmy Savile, who himself was involved in Satanism and SRA.
That's important to stress.
People are beginning to recognize the importance of dealing with the whole issue of child sex abuse, including SRA. And we need to keep on pushing this exposure of SRA, because now is the time to do it, while people are more open than before. And the Satanists are panicking. If there is such a thing as a satanic panic, it's the Satanists panicking because they know they're being exposed. They know their lies are being exposed. So what do? They set up groups like Hoaxstat. That is a sign of their fear. That is a sign of their panic.
I want to say that what mentioned earlier. Why would anyone want to hinder anyone exposing child abuse cover-up? So when it does occur and there is attack on the source of the information, like myself and many others, we must look on the perpetrators of this and the authors of these documents and the directors of these videos that are going out with very, very suspicious eyes. Why on God's earth would anyone want to damage the truth coming out on child abuse? And the other thing I get is quite a horrendous thing said about Jesus. They don't like that name at all.
Yes, because Jesus actually said, if you look at the Bible, he said a lot of things about demons and the devil, which expose the truth about them. So, for example, Jesus called the devil the father of lies, and that lying was his native language. And you will find, as you know, with the Satanists and with Hochstadt, that lying is their native language. Lying, deception, that's all they know, is using lies and deception to try and get what they want. And the important thing to also realize about Satanism is that it wants to turn upside down the definition of good and evil. They want to consider everything that is good as evil, and they want everything that is evil to be considered as good in our society. They're not willing to just privately follow that belief system. They want to impose it on our society so that what we recognize as good now will become regarded as evil. And what we recognize as evil now will become mainstream and accepted as good. And that is their agenda. And to do that agenda, to impose that agenda, they have to get into all the influential levels of our society, which is what they have been doing. Yeah. The way to expose them, the way to stop this evil agenda, is to expose SRA. So it all starts with talking about SRA, talking about SRA as something that exists, talking about the evidence, the fact that there's this list of successfully prosecuted SRA cases, the fact that Operation Conifer referred to Ted Heath's SRA, and the fact that there were 6 witnesses who shared with Operation Conifer detectives about Ted Heath's SRA, the fact that the Metropolitan Police website acknowledges the existence of satanic abuse, the fact that there are so many SRA survivors and victims coming out and continuing to coming out seeking help. Many in the therapist professions will tell you that, especially those therapists who deal with dissociative identity disorder, that many of their DID survivor patients are SRA victims.
Can we talk about that? Because I know that a few people with DID, and they want it spoken about because they want their voice to be heard, and so can we just go on a little bit about the DID, what it is and how it manufactured?
Yes. Dissociative identity disorder, the old name for that was multiple personality disorder. And I mention that because it makes it a bit easier for people to understand what it is not so much an illness, but more a survivor mechanism, a survival mechanism that the victims use as the only way to cope with the horrific abuse that they are suffering. The therapists that I've spoken to who have long experience of dealing with DID patients have told me that the vast majority of their patients have suffered from SRA. Not all of them, but the vast majority. And because when you think about it, a child suffering SRA and all the torture and abuse that it involves, it's so difficult for them to mentally cope with it, so their psychological, their personality, their psyche fragments in the face of this horror. Yeah. And that way, for example, they let one part of their personality deal with the horrors, while the main personality can continue to function from day to day without remembering all those horrors that happened to it, because that dark, ugly role has been delegated to another personality.
And the other thing is that at some point these memories will get triggered and will start to surface. And the other thing that's coming out with sort of government-sanctioned therapists are bringing about this false memory syndrome, which is, I feel, brought in to totally debunk bona fide victims of SRA.
Well, if you look at the history of the so-called false memory movement, it's mainly traced back to people who are themselves involved in child abuse. That this movement was actually started as a group that wanted to try and debunk or supposedly debunk accusations of child sex abuse that were leveled at them. So there was a definite political motive involved in so-called false memory thinking, and they don't actually have any hard scientific evidence to support what they claim. They are motivated mainly by the desire to not be put behind bars for their child sex abuse. So it's become a convenient tool for people who want to run away from allegations of child sex abuse and of SRA. But just because the mind may suppress memories in order to survive and continue to function, doesn't mean that when those memories come back that they are going to be wrong or based on delusion. Doesn't mean that at all. We ourselves can see it from our own everyday memories that we may recall, that we recall memories of past events, some of which might be nasty, and we know that our recollection of those memories are not inaccurate. So why should it be so much different for abuse victims?
Yeah, unfortunately, due to the sheer outlandish and horrific nature of what they go through, if you was to speak to the uninitiated or the uneducated, that they'll sit there and think it's a load of bullshit, it's rubbish, because it. The other thing, right, when we're a nation of animal lovers, animals don't get away with it either, do they? Can you talk about sort of some of the things that they do to animals as well?
Yes, the ritual sacrifice of animals is also very common by Satanist abusers. The animals can be any kind of animal. I've come across reports of dogs being ritually sacrificed, dogs being eaten after being ritually sacrificed, cats as well. I even came across one report of a cat being crucified during a Satanist ritual. These are commonplace in Satanist rituals. We see sometimes evidence of this reaching the newspapers in England.
Well, horses were getting stabbed, weren't they?
When you come across reports of horses being stabbed or cows being mutilated. One of the notorious locations for these animal mutilations that actually reach the news is in Dartmoor, which seems to happen quite regularly. So we see that although this is a nation of animal lovers, there is still a general denial of the link between Satanist ritual abuse and the killing and mutilation of animals, and a lack of action by the groups, animal protection groups in this country, on this subject.
I listened to a manifesto, and it was played to me from a YouTube footage, and it was to do with a religious group, and it said that they're against bullying, they're against organised structural religion, and it seems quite a benevolent religion. And I was told at the end of it, it's actually the Church of Satan, and what they claim they purport to be for, as we've heard, are worlds apart. And there have been a few Satanists have put things on mine just saying we are a religious group and we don't do that. What are your answers to that?
My answers to that is that you cannot take any of the claims of these groups at surface level. Yeah. You have to look a lot deeper, because Satanism gives intellectual license to people to do the sort of horrible things that we have been discussing, because as the Church of Satan's leader Anton LaVey and Aleister Crowley have very publicly said, it's all summed up in do whatever you want. So it doesn't matter who you hurt, doesn't matter who you kill even, just do whatever you want. Now that kind of teaching is far from benevolent when you take it to its logical outcome. So do not be fooled by these Satanist groups trying to mainstream themselves, trying to get religious respectability, because that's all they're trying to do. They're trying to put a spin on what they believe to attract members, to try and make themselves more acceptable in society. But at the end of the day, they are giving the theoretical and intellectual justification for the kind of horrific torture and abuse that we've been discussing.
We got a question. Put it out, John.
Well, I'm seeing a vein here where people are saying things like it's a very Christian belief, Satanism. So how else could we define it if you take away the Christian aspect of the word Satan? Because it's an evil act at the end of the day. So how could you turn that to people that don't want to follow Christianity then?
Right. Okay. So what we got is the people saying that the basis of Satanism has got some sort of Christian origin, is it?
Christian belief.
It's a Christian belief. Yeah. You know.
That's actually not true. The earliest religion to talk about Satan is Judaism, which precedes Christianity, obviously, by a long period of time. But if you see Satanism, which is what it is, as devil worship has occurred even before the time of Judaism. Devil worship has always been there for thousands of years in human history. And one may give it the name Satanism or devil worship, but the devil and the worship of the devil and people who believe that the devil exists has existed for thousands of years in human history. So we may give it a more modern label, but devil worship has been around for millenniums. And it's important to understand that. And child sacrifice has also been around for millenniums.
Well, it's documented as well.
Yes, it's well documented that child sacrifice and the sacrifice of children to demons has existed for millenniums, long before Christianity even existed.
And what would you say, because of the work you do, and there was even a journalist was set out to debunk the work that I and my group are doing, and your name was mentioned, and she said, yes, I know who that is. I mean, do you think these people would have cursed you, put hexes on you, done rituals, to see your downfall?
They may have. I don't care. The fact of the matter is, there's a job to be done, and that's exposing SRA.
Yeah.
I've been doing this 26 years, so I'm not just some fly-by-night on this subject. Yeah. And they know I'm going to be around, and if I have to do it for another 26 years or 50 years, I will still be doing it. And there's nothing they can do to stop it. Yeah. At the end of the day, if one is determined to expose the truth, one will carry on. Yeah. You just have to keep going and realize the importance of what you're doing, just how important it is.
I mean, I do it because I don't want to see kids hurt, and I know the horrors they've been through, and the people I work closely with now have been through these horrors, and I've seen the damage it's done to them as adults, and I believe I've got a job to do, and I believe in Jesus, and I firmly believe in Jesus. Go ahead, go on, Joe.
Question. So where do these rituals take place? Where can the public sort of keep an eye?
Yeah.
The churches, the graveyards.
Yeah, where do these rituals take place, and are there any indicators that a place is being used for this purpose?
Yes, there are a variety of places where SRA takes place. We need to bear in mind that for the Satanists, nighttime is daytime. So they do their rituals at night, usually very late at night, and that also is convenient for them to avoid detection. So the variety of places they use for their rituals, it's quite extensive. It can range from a large house or medium-sized house, indoors. They have a special room set aside for the rituals, often in the basement, but not always, to an opening in a clearing in a forest, in a wood. Clearings in woods are quite popular.
I've heard about abattoirs and abortion clinics.
Yes, that's also true. They love death. They love to promote death. So where death occurs, like abortion clinics, and abortion can be seen, and I believe is, a modern form of child sacrifice. They will go there to do their rituals. They're even attracted to suicide spots where there are a lot of suicides. They will be attracted to as well. Cemeteries, because of their love of death, because of their love also of corpses. Interesting to note, one newspaper reported on Jimmy Savile's love of corpses, that he had necrophilia. Another sure sign that he was involved in Satanism.
Porter as well, I think.
At a hospital.
St. James's Hospital, and he had access to the mortuary.
Yes. So they would be attracted to graveyards, cemeteries, to sometimes even try and access the bodies in those graveyards, especially freshly buried bodies, for their rituals. And for example, Highgate Cemetery is notorious for Satanist rituals, has been for many years. And Audrey Harper describes one of her coven's rituals at Highgate Cemetery back in the early 60s. There are also other places which they may use, for example, church buildings. If they can get into the church building, they may have, for example, an insider who's actually a Satanist in the church who has access to the keys. They might also access places where there are children. They love to target children, as we know, to do SRA. So schools, for example, they may have a place in a school. We know that in the Hampstead case, it was not just a church that was identified as SRA location, but also the school next door to it. So I know that especially in the United States, there have been a lot of cases where nurseries have been used for SRA, where the children were sent to the nurseries by their parents, and they were being subjected to SRA at the nurseries.
Yeah, there was one case, a guy come to me and he was sent to an approved school in East London, and he was abused, and he remembers it was ritualistic. There was pentagrams on the floor, and it was a caretaker that was doing it, and that was in a residential school, and he was subject to it, as was his brother and many other kids. So,
one of the sad things about not dealing with SRA in this country as it should be dealt with is that the Satanist abusers get away with their crimes and are able to work with children because there's no record that they've ever been arrested for abusing children. So that enables them to get jobs, for example, as teachers, to get close to children, to get into nurseries, to have access to young children. And it's hard to stop them because the SRA is not dealt with, so they don't have any police records. And it is quite common knowledge that Satanist abusers will often try and get jobs that give them close access to children.
Well, I mean, we're going to have to be mindful of the light. We're running out of light soon. So, right. But is there any more stuff that you want to go up, get, speak about? Yeah, please do.
Yes, to say that on a practical level, we need to keep exposing SRA. Now is the time to do it. I believe that the Satanists are on the back foot, and they have been on the back foot since 2011, when the very public revelations were made about Jimmy Savile.
Yeah, I agree.
And after that, the public revelations about VIP abuse. A lot of the VIP abuse is not child sex abuse. It is Satanist ritual abuse. That's why they're so afraid of a full investigation being done about the VIP abuse. And we need to be campaigning for full investigation of the VIP abuse, which includes SRA. And we need to point out that it includes SRA.
And if just push the mic over this way. And one of the biggest case in Belgium, Marc Dutroux, he had links to satanic abuse as well.
Yes, and he had links to people in places of power, VIPs. So if we can get the VIP abuse investigated fully as it should be, we will not just see VIP's child sex abuse being exposed. We will see VIP SRA being exposed. That's why it's so important to push for full investigation. And the one thing that gives us the smoking gun on VIP abuse is Edward Heath's SRA and child sex abuse. If the top VIP, the top politician in this country, the Prime Minister himself, could be involved in SRA, then who wouldn't be?
Yeah. There was one of the source of information that come to me that she was a woman that was involved in as a victim of satanic ritual abuse, and she was upset because there was a big party being put on and she wasn't invited to, because bear in mind, along with the abuse, she was kept locked away and poorly fed, and at least when she went to a ritual that she got fed and things like that. And there was one and she wasn't allowed to go to it because it was only boys, and she said that was being set up for Ted Heath. That's what she told me. But there is a question. Trace, what's the question we got?
Well, it's just interesting. One they said, is it possible to follow on from this that you actually have a practice satanic person here to actually?
Oh, what? So to the other side of it, have someone from Satanism giving their point, their voice heard, is that they'll be having a go at me after this interview. So just watch my Facebook page, and all those having a go. There's your answer. They're having their say.
The Satanist voices are also heard through their proxies, the so-called objective journalists, some of whom we know are on the RAINS list, who set out on a very regular basis to claim that SRA does not exist. So Satanists have more than enough influence in our society and getting their voice out, and it's high time that the people who actually speak the truth get their voices out. And that's why it's important to have interviews like this, and it's great that you are speaking out on SRA, and the fact that the Satanists attack you for it shows that you're actually exposing the truth, which is what they hate. And we need to keep exposing the truth. We need to realize that the evidence is on our side, that knowing that SRA, it's a matter of just following the evidence. Any reasonable person who follows the evidence, what the Crown Courts have found, what the Metropolitan Police have said, will conclude that SRA exists in the UK. Yep. No reasonable person can just ignore this evidence.
They're still recording. Yeah, and you know, I have spoke out and I got attacked out, and actually, and if you've got Satanists as your enemy, you're doing a good job, aren't you?
Yes, definitely.
You know, and
well done.
And the reason I'm speaking out is I've seen the damage these vile animals have done to good people that have now become my friends. I hold them close to my heart, and I've seen the disgusting filth they do, and I will continue doing what I'm doing. You know, I'm going to be standing in the light of Jesus, and I'm going to be continue to help, and I'm going to do my bit to expose it, because what they do is evil, and anyone who supports them actions, then we must consider them just as bad, and also those that cover up for these people as well.
Yes, you're absolutely right to do what you do. The Satanists attack you because they hate the truth being exposed, because when the truth is exposed, they are exposed. And this is all the more reason why you need to keep speaking out, why we need to keep exposing the evil. The Bible tells us to expose the deeds of darkness in Ephesians chapter 5, verse 11. And I too am a friend of Jesus, and I know that Jesus loves children, and he wants children protected, and he wants children protected from evil and for evil to be exposed.
What's the bit of scripture where Jesus says, if you touch the children, you put a millstone around your neck?
I believe off the top of my head is Matthew 18. Yeah. I think that's also close to the verse where he said that if you welcome a child in my name, you welcome me. Yeah. So Jesus was identifying himself with the child, and the welfare of the child, as well as saying that if you corrupt one of these children, then it is better for you to have a millstone tied around your neck and be thrown into the sea.
You know, and I conducted an interview with two incredibly brave and honourable lads who were sexually abused within a Christian Catholic institution in Northern Ireland, and it was priests that raped them. Now, these men that do this to children, and they hide behind their cloth and do it in the name of Jesus, well, they've got to be evil themselves. There was just no way that is ever an act of God or people of God, you know. So we're seeing it coming out, and you know, God bless Wilfred for all he's been doing, and he's been tirelessly doing this. So just gonna do you want to allude to that little bit of scripture there, Wilfred?
Yes, I've just confirmed that it is in Matthew 18, and in Matthew 18 verse 5, it says, "Whoever welcomes one such child in my name welcomes me." And this is Jesus speaking. And the next verse, verse 6 in Matthew 18, Jesus said, "If any of you put a stumbling block before one of these little ones who believe in me, it would be better for you if a great millstone were fastened around your neck and you were drowned in the depth of the sea." So we shouldn't underestimate just how much Jesus cares about children and the very painful punishment that is reserved in eternity for those who abuse children. But we have a role, a job, a responsibility in this world to try and get these people brought to justice.
That's what I'm saying. We're in this world and we've got a court system, and the only reason they'll come to justice is for people to speak out and expose them. So let's do that.
Yes, and we always need to remember that it's actually very simple. All we need to do is publicly speak out about SRA, that it exists in this country, and keep on doing it. And keep on doing it until it is widely recognized in this country that SRA exists. Because until that happens, the biggest weapon of the Satanist abusers will be denial and disbelief. Unfortunately, that is the problem in this country, which should have been resolved decades ago. By comparison, in the United States, there's much more openness in talking about SRA, so they even have specialist police units set up to deal with SRA in the United States. So more justice is done on this issue, although there's room for improvement in the United States than over here, because people just talk about it. Here, people get tongue-tied. People tie themselves into knots rather than speak publicly about SRA. I don't see why it should be such a problem to speak out about it. Because the Americans can do it, why can't the British? This is what has protected Satanist ritual abusers in this country for decades. And it's time to end the silence. It's time to end the silence by ourselves speaking out and not just waiting for somebody else to do it.
Well, I know there'll be a lot of people heavily relieved at the fact that we've had this interview. I've been approached by so many people and said, please do an interview dedicated to exposing SRA. But apart from that, is there anything else as a parting note that you'd like to say, Wilfred?
Yes, I'd just like to conclude by saying, keep on speaking out. Don't pay any attention to the fools who keep trying to debunk you. Realize the importance of speaking out, that you are protecting children from the most horrific and unspeakable evil when you speak out. And that I'm so glad that there are people like yourself who are coming out and speaking out. I wish there were so many more of you.
So do I.
But there will be, because as you keep speaking out, more will speak out. We just have to get the ball rolling and keep the momentum going. And it will be like a snowball gathering momentum. I believe now is the time to speak out, because the doors have been steadily opening. God has been opening the doors on this issue in this country, starting with the Jimmy Savile revelations, then the VIP abuse scandal revelations, and then we've had other publicity on other abuse cases. Child abuse has become a much more topical issue in this country. So we're moving in the right direction, but we want to move a lot faster for the sake of the children. So we just need to speed it up by speaking out even more.
Right, well, I want to say thank you so much, Wilfred, for that. I want to say thank you to Tracy and the Way of Life Foundation for facilitating this and the brilliant work they do for our community. So, so we'll carry on doing it. I'll be in touch with Wilfred. If anyone wants to come forward with info, get in touch, and we can disseminate it to the right place or the right agencies. So please speak out, and God bless you, Wilfred.
God bless.
Right, over and out. Just press